Warning, I do not promote the use of legal or illegal psychoactive substances. This story is told strictly for harm reduction purposes. Please read the following information from the YouTube community guidelines. Video content that promotes or feature the sale, use, or abuse of illegal drugs, regulated drugs or substances, or other dangerous products is not suitable for advertising. Videos discussing drugs or dangerous substances for educational purposes are generally suitable for advertising, so as long as drug use or substance abuse is not graphic or glorified. This video stands in accordance to these guidelines, and the following is a story from the Erowid experience vault, and is intended to help educate and reduce the amount of harm regarding unsafe substance use, through showing what the impact of these substances can be, and so that people don't try it themselves and get harmed. The creator of this video does not condone the use of either legal or illegal drugs, period. Prior to my experience with 25i, I should say that I had very limited experience with LSD and DMT. But pleasant, and at times extreme experiences, but limited nonetheless. 25i is the only phenethylamine I have ever consumed. I had used 25i many times recreationally for the past few months. The durations were always acceptably long but not extreme, 6 to 7 hours, and the experiences were always super pleasant. I really liked the extreme visuals and the shorter duration. The 25i I had received were in dipped blotter form, so exact dosage is an issue, and that was mistake number 1. The experience that I'm about to describe is the reason why I refuse to take 25i ever again. Despite the wonderful closed-eyed visuals and open-eyed visuals, I just don't think that I'm personally meant for this hallucinogen. It brought up some deeply uncomfortable feelings and thoughts that in truth would have been extremely dangerous if I was alone during my experience. My fiancé and I, at the time, had decided to drop 2 blotter tabs of 25i and take a nice little nature walk on a local walkway in our city. We drove to the walkway. In honesty, we could have walked. It's very close to our home, and took the tabs in the car, got out and proceeded to walk. On the path, there are little side paths that lead into the wooded area. During the come up, we walked around one of these paths. By the time we got back on the main path, we were starting to feel the initial body high. This was about 20 to 30 minutes into the experience. We started walking along the path and came upon one of the local parks that sits on the path. At this point, we realize we're really in for it this time. I should mention that I had only ever taken 2 tabs of blotter 25i once before and had a freak out. However, I had contributed this to cannabis use during the trip. We sit down on this bench underneath this gorgeous tree and watch the grass in front of us dance in these lace-like patterns, almost like an Indian tapestry. We decide to keep going and cross the road to go deeper into the nature trail and walk alongside the local river. At this point, our bodies are beginning to overheat because it is a hot summer day and the 25i is dramatically increasing our body temperature. My fiancé begins to panic, and I start freaking out in my head, thinking that everyone is going to know who walks by us that he is freaking out on some drug. At this point, our visuals are getting really intense. The trees are beginning to blur and become fractals. We are barely into the nature path before he decides to call a friend to pick us up and take us back to our house. I get very upset at this point because I thought we were going to have this fantastic day in nature and he cannot handle his drugs well enough to do that. This upset feeling I directly contribute to the drug. In truth, he was making the best decision because we were about to be tripping far too hard to be out in public without a sitter. On the walk back to the park, the paved path turned into rainbow lace and all the trees were so beautiful, like a painting in a tunnel. I remember my fiancé pointing down and saying rainbows because we literally were walking on rainbows. The only way I have been able to describe it is by explaining to friends that it was like going through one of the tunnels on Rainbow Road for Mario Kart Wii. Just colorful and intense. The visuals at this point were comparable to a DMT experience. In all honesty, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. But I didn't want to go home. I wanted to stay here, where all the beauty was. Somehow, we managed to cross the street, which in all honesty, I have no idea how we did it safely, and make it back to the gazebo area in the park, to wait for 2 of our friends to pick us up and take us back home. While at the gazebo, I had to talk my fiancé down. He was very clearly nervous and anxious about being outside, and I just kept telling him that it's okay, our friends are coming, even though I did not want to go home. When we got home, He immediately relaxed, and throughout the rest of the day, had a good experience with it. However, when I got home, I knew it was going to trigger me into a bad trip. I looked at my fiancé dead in the face, and told him immediately I'm about to go into a bad trip. He told me after the trip that when I said that I didn't sound serious but actually erotic almost 25, I definitely has an erotic element to it. It came out again later. Normally, I wouldn't tell another fellow tripper about my bad experience, but we were probably an hour in, and my previous experience with the chemical told me that things were about to get more intense, and we were going to need someone sober. We were both very hot from being outside, and in order to try to calm down, I took a cold shower. While in the shower, he had 2 friends come over to hang out. When I got out, he told me to sit down, put on some headphones, listen to music and enjoy the closed-eyed visuals like I usually like to do when I trip. I decided to do that. The album I chose to listen to is pretty intense when tripping. I won't name band names, but I'll tell you the name of the song I listened to is called The Highest Journey. I was getting extreme closed-eyed visuals at a definite triple plus level when I literally traveled so deep into my trip that I lost consciousness. For what is the next 4 hours, at least, I begin to loop. I sit down, blank out, wake up and begin asking what happened, and then my friends tell me you're tripping, and then I go oh, get up, walk around, sit back down and then repeat. It began happening so much that when I would wake up and ask what happened it actually became humorous. My friends tell me I asked this over 20 times. I don't remember any of it. I felt like reality was a floor of a skyscraper and that tripping is the access to the elevator where you can choose to descend from reality and ascend from reality, reaching different levels of consciousness and understanding. However, I felt like I was just on the elevator at all times, like a child pressing all the buttons, and every once in a while I would end back up on the floor I was supposed to be on. Everything felt shifted, slightly turned to the left. After this experience, I read about others who have experienced this tilted perception of reality on phenethylamines, including Alexander Shulgin. Finally, I seem to break away from my looping and get to a semi-functional state. We go over to a friend's house down the street, where everyone is hanging out. I still don't feel completely right, and I'm very clearly traumatized by the looping that occurred earlier. At this point, I haven't eaten all day, but I can't eat anything heavy so someone gets me a salad from somewhere which I eat, somewhat. I continuously keep secluding myself from the group, because of this pervasive negative feeling I keep having over the experience of the afternoon, and how I don't think it's quite done with me yet. And it wasn't. When I get back home, something is not right with me mentally. I'm not all there. I begin getting very delusional. I'm in reality, but I'm not. I'm not getting extreme visuals, but my mind isn't thinking correctly. Earlier there was a lot of talk of the movie Inception. A bunch of friends wanted to watch it. I become convinced that I'm still tripping, and the only way out is to kill ourselves. Similar to the storyline in Inception. My fiancé swore up and down that he was okay, that he wasn't tripping at all anymore, and he had no idea why I was. Every time I would try to lay down to go to sleep, I would freak out in a panic, convinced that sleeping meant death. I started thinking about how I was going to lose everyone I ever loved. All these terrifying thoughts kept rushing into my head. My heartbeat started to skyrocket again, like it was when I was looping. My chest was in an intense amount of pain. I was still having light visuals and body high, so there was definitely some drug in effect, but I think I was also in the midst of an anxiety attack, made worse by the drug. Because my fiancé had taken the drug, I didn't believe anything he was telling me. I kept trying to convince him that he was still tripping, that everything wasn't okay. He literally slapped me multiple times because I asked him to try to get me to wake up from all of this. I kept repeating that I needed to go to a hospital, but because our city was in the middle of a huge drug crackdown, we both figured we'd end up in a lot of trouble if we went. I remember freaking out about cops, which he attributed to the fact that right before we parked the car to go on our walk, we passed a cop. At one point, I was convinced that my love for him was the only thing keeping me conscious, and while he was holding me down keeping me from freaking out, I began to make out with him wildly. I vomited at one point. It was just god freaking awful. I was so confused. After a difficult night, it was morning, and I was still freaking out. Finally, I tell him that I had to go back to where my bad trip started, the gazebo. That was the definitive moment that I knew I was going to go into a bad trip. We walked back out there. Walking there was like a dream. Being outside in the new day's sunlight made me realize I wasn't just crazy, I was still having visuals and the drug was still having an effect. I didn't understand why, because all my other experiences had much shorter durations. We went back and sat at the gazebo, and I watched a tree in the background, the leaves dancing mildly but nowhere near as strong as a come up. The colors were so intense. I remember his face was so colorful. I really felt like I was in a dream and I needed to wake up. I kept hearing our cell phones go off. I thought it was our cell phones going off in reality trying to wake us up. Finally, I snapped out of it. We walked to my car, and we drove it back home and slept. Considering the visuals, I was still having an morning. This places my trip's duration at around 16 hours long, far longer than any trip I had ever had with 25i before. It took 3 days after that trip. We took the tabs on Saturday at 2 p.m. in order for me to feel completely normal again. I went to work still feeling a little crazy. For a while, I think I was honestly suffering from some post-traumatic stress. It's been about a month since that trip and I feel fine now. In the trip and the few days following, I honestly thought that I had permanently f***ed myself up. I thought I had drove myself insane. My chest hurt for a few days afterward. On my previous trips with 25i, I've only ever taken 1 to 1.5 tabs with no delusions or shitty afterglow effects. It can be a very pleasant experience, honestly, similar to LSD, but with a speedier and sometimes anxious element to it. If you are going to take 25i, start small and find your balance. As I mentioned before, I know people who have taken much higher doses than I did with no ill effects. Personally, this difficult experience has left a bad taste in my mouth and I'll be sticking with the trip to means from now on. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing.